So, yeah, if I just wanted to loosen this soil here to get that weed out. Yeah, I've noticed when working around perennials, anybody who has perennial gardens, if anybody's got perennial gardens, you've noticed that a tine tool is way more forgiving to the roots that are already in the ground. We've got several perennial beds of flowers and herbs and things like that, and of course the weeds get in there where they come through the mulch and whatnot. And this is a large tool, but of course they have smaller tools with tines on them like this, either the round or flat tines. And you can kind of work that ground up. In fact, I was weeding a bunch of our black raspberries where the weeds had gotten in there in the black raspberries. And obviously, you know, they have a huge root system in those raspberries, and you just don't want to go in there with some big chopping hoe and start wailing because you cut your roots all to pieces. But just the action of putting the tines into the ground and picking it straight up out just loosened things enough and did minimal damage to the raspberry roots that, you know, you could just go in there and pull the weeds by hand. So the tine tools are something that don't get quite the press that they should in terms of being just a less invasive way to loosen soil, doing minimal damage to both the soil, the roots, and the worms. And then of course, we got this guy. This soil is pretty hard out here, of course, because it's just the walking path. But you can see how that oscillating hoe just wants to plunge down into the soil. Just naturally by pushing it, it just works its way deeper. Look at that, it's going almost 3 inches deep. Versus that tool there. I'm gonna try sliding that one along. That one's just gonna stay more on the surface because that blade stays flat. And then you got, yep. And then you got this guy, which you can control the angle of with the angle of the handle. And it's just kind of that slicing and sliding. No, those are already gone. Those are already gone. But the reach you can have with these long handled tools is really nice too. I mean, you can get over around your, and the thing is, people say sometimes, oh, that handle's too long for me. I'm not that tall. The way a tool like this is held, the extra handle length is not a problem because you're just choking up on the handle. That is, the extra length goes past you. It's not that it's coming at you. You don't have to hold the tool by the end of the handle. So.
Why did you not put these on all of them?
Well, because that's a good point. I didn't cover that in the talk over there, but that pistol grip is so nice, particularly when you're pushing a tool. That's why they put it on that one, because that, of all these tools, is one that you put a lot of pushing force on. And if you know, there's, well, in fact, this is a good example here, because this is a push tool as well, but it doesn't have that pistol grip on the end. So when you're pushing this tool, all the force of you pushing it is based on the friction of your hands against this. That is, it's your grip that's doing the work. So you use this thing half a day and I guarantee you're gonna have blisters because of that sliding. That handle's trying to slide through your hand all day. This thing, if you hold it by that end, it's this whole surface that's you're pushing. So there's no direct friction here. Well, there should be one. Okay. There should be one. But the Swiss just didn't get that involved with it. The Dutch get a little crazier about their tool design, different company, different point of view. There's a company I found, oh gosh, what the heck is the name of the thing? I think it's called Woody's Handle Helper or something like this, but it's like a clamp-on handle. It's a little D-handled thing, looks like the top of a shovel handle, and it clamps on. It might be a T-handle actually, but it just clamps onto a wooden tool shank. Those things are pretty cool. And there might be other companies making them, but it essentially gives you a push grip. It's not right in line like this, it would be like right on top, but still it's better than nothing.
And this one you hold?
No, that one would be just held, yeah, just like a regular hoe, because you got to get that angle, pushing and pulling on it. And then the broad fork, where did that thing go off to? I saw it flying down that way. But yeah, you were doing the right thing there. We'll just step that into the ground. I feel a rock. Get my broad fork jiggle going here. Did I impale the drip line? No. Yeah, lift it. Woo! See, I don't have my broad fork legs on yet. Gotta get in the zen of it here. Yep, just like that. And on and on and on and on. Yep. What else did we haul in here? Oh yeah, we don't have any deep-rooted tap roots in here, you know, to go down to China and dig out with that thing. Oh yeah, the sow thistle there. That's probably not a super long one, but yeah, obviously, yeah, that's kind of the idea. Just to get down there and get that whole taproot out. Well, that one is a miserable little taproot, but we could have gone down 8 or 10 inches. But yeah, for a sharpshooter tool, that's really a cool one there. Yeah, pretty minimal effort. I mean, you're not pushing much into the ground with that thing. And for somebody who's harvesting things like dandelion for medicinal purposes, I mean, you want to get as much of that taproot as possible without cutting it. So, and you don't want to dig up, you know, for one dandelion plant, you don't want to dig up this wide with a digging fork. So it's a nice harvest tool for people who are doing that. Yeah, exactly, right. It's a hoary, hoary, hoary. And when they're this long, it's 4 hories. Yeah, you're into some pretty compacted soil there.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. And typically what I would do if I was working into something as compacted as that, I would turn it at an angle, because that way you're kidding it on that corner and you're going to dig in a lot, you know, deeper with minimal effort, rather than trying to slice in with that entire cutting surface at once. And they do, you know, a lot of these tools, you'll notice they have a little bit of a convex edge. See that? Oh, yeah. It's not just flat right across, it's actually a slight bow to it. And that's to spread the cutout over that slightly longer surface area to get a little bit of a slicing motion. That is, you're not breaking the crust on that entire surface at once. You're you know, if it's cupped this way or it's cupped this way, you're slicing slightly into that surface. But, you know, like I said, if I'm into super hard stuff like that, I'll just use that corner, because that even gives you more of a slicing action. See, you can kind of use this thing as a slicing hoe. You just hold it like this and just slide it along the surface, just slice things off. It's amazing how whatever tool you grab, you end up adapting it to what you want to do. So you see, I can hold this like this and keep my back straight. That is, just using it as a pendulum, essentially. Now you have to be somewhat coordinated or you'll cut your foot off, but yeah, you can get right along with something like this. And this is why this hoe design here is such a universal hoe design around the world. You know, people use these things in third world countries for everything. They use it for you know, breaking the field in the first place and planting the crops and harvesting the crops and weeding. It's just like, I have this hoe. That's what we use. And they're made right down here by the guy with the forge. So.
These are made by the...
Oh, this is a German.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoop. Trying to decapitate myself.
Is there anything else made by this broadfork guy that you carry?
Nope. He makes broad forks, and he's making some scythe handles, some wooden scythe handles that are fully adjustable, but he doesn't have those really production scale yet. He's just kind of making a few and selling them, because I was like, Larry, you build enough of those, I'll sell them. I'll put them on the website because they're really nice. But yeah, Larry's an artist more than he is a production guy. So.
And do you carry scythe?
We carry a basic German scythe. Yeah, it's a nice starter scythe. It's not as adjustable as some of the better ones, but it's good quality. Yep. Okay. Well, we'll come back and weed the rest of this later. So let's move on to the motorized tools. All right. we didn't cover the human-powered wheeled tools, but I'll talk briefly about those before we jump into the actual motorized stuff. So on a lot of market farms, there's an in-between place where it's not terribly efficient to use the handheld gardening tools, and it's also not terribly efficient to use the motorized tools because they're just a little too big or high impact or whatever. And that in-between space is met by these wheel hoes, which is this, the wheel hoe design goes back hundreds of years. You find old style, big wheel cultivators, single wheel cultivators that are rusting in barns and sitting in antique stores all over the place. The modern designs of wheel hoes, both from this country and in other countries, are more versatile. There's more different tools you can put on them. They're also designed for a little more ergonomics and to maximize the leverage and power you have available as a human. This wheel hoe that I'm showing here is a Haas, as you can see. This is made in Georgia. This is a nice little tool company. They're obviously an American company building their stuff all right in Georgia. They're not outsourcing any of it. Good quality, good versatility. It's maybe not quite as fancy as some of the European models, but they're half the price, and they just seem to be a really good value for a lot of market gardeners. The handles are adjustable, both in the handles are adjustable in height. Let me rephrase that. This bolt loosens up here, and the steel part of the tool is actually slotted slightly up and down, so you can move that handle up and down. The slot is only about a ½ inch long, so you look at that and you think, well, that's not much of adjustment at all. Well, it is, but because by the time you get all the way out to the end of that handle, a ½ inch down there is like 8 inches up here. It makes a huge difference. Also, there's an angle adjustment that a lot of people don't know exists right in here. That is, this bolt loosens up, and you would find that behind this bolt is a slot as well. Again, it's not a big slot, it's just maybe ½ inch long, but it allows the wheel to be adjusted up or down slightly in relation to the body of the kind of the working part of the tool where the different implements are going to connect, and that controls how deep that implement is in the ground. So by playing with both those angles, these things can fit any person. I mean, you can be 5 feet tall or you can be 7 feet tall, and you can use a wheel hoe if you get those angle adjustments right. One of the nice things about the Haas, I think, is the steel wheel. I mean, some people really like the rubber wheel that's on the Swiss-made version, but you know what? That rubber wheel goes flat. It's a bicycle wheel, and there's nothing more irritating than getting out your wheel hoe and having a flat tire, just like a flat tire on a wheelbarrow or anything else. It's just extra maintenance. And the thing is, you're not rolling this thing on concrete, so the rubber wheel is not making that big a difference in how the tool moves through the soil. And typically, you're rolling this thing on worked soil. So the fact that it's steel doesn't, the soil is providing the cushioning necessary. So it's just a no frills, lifetime wheel. So I don't consider that a detraction. There's two styles of handles you'll find on a lot of wheel hoes. There's the more traditional steam bent handle. Some people call that a plow type handle, and that handle just has a slight curvature to the end of it. It just doesn't have this grip at all. It just comes up and has a nice little curve. That's the more common type of hoe or a wheel hoe handle that you'll find, especially on the old traditional hoes. The reason that is because that handle was taken directly from a plow. That's why they call them plow handles. That is, if you had an old horse-drawn moldboard plow, which are still produced in the Amish communities, you would use it would have a set of handles like that, and those handles are used to guide the plow as it's moving through the ground. Well, guess what? You're not pushing those handles if you're plowing with a horse. You'd better not be. The horse better be doing all the work. You're just steering the thing. So those handles, when you think about it, are not designed to push. They're designed to guide. Well, with a wheel hoe, you are the motive power behind this thing. You're making it go. So if you've got a handle that just has a nice little curvature to it like that, it's just like what I was talking about over there with the stirrup hose or any kind of push-pull hoe. you're gripping that handle, and the entire push of that tool is based on the friction and the grip of your hands. So after using that thing a day, you're gonna have some blisters or you're gonna have some cramped hands, because if you don't grip it hard enough, you just start sliding up and down the handles. The pistol grip handle is a way better idea as far as I'm concerned. And this came out a little later because Haas, when they originally introduced this wheel hoe, they were using only the steam bent handles because they were able to buy those from a producer who was making handles for moldboard plows for the Amish community. Once they built up their sales volume enough, they could actually afford to have their own handles specially made. They started going to the pistol grips. And this makes way more sense because your palms are actually doing the pushing. You don't need to grip it here hardly at all, because when this thing is in action, it's all this. You could just about take your fingers off. It's pushing the tool. So some people have complained that this is a little big of a grip. That is the distance between here and here. If you've got a really small hand, it's hard to grip that. But the thing is, you don't need to grip it much, because again, it's your hand, it's your palm that's doing most of the pushing. And what I found is that it's easy enough to cut a little extra wood away. If you have a small hand and you're using, say, a stirrup hoe attachment on one of these things, the stirrups that go back and forth like the handheld stirrup, and you are using some pull action, well, you can just take a handsaw and cut a little bit out of there. It's a lot harder to grow extra wood than it is to cut wood. So if they give you a little extra there, you can always trim it back and sand it down and make it smooth. You can kind of custom fit it to yourself. Same thing on tool handles. You're better off having a longer tool handle than you need, and if you're shorter and don't need the extra length, you can always saw it off. But it is hell to stretch wood. It just doesn't stretch easily. So
Demonstrate that one more time with the same.
the tool I've got on here now is just the standard Cultivation Fingers, and of course those things are just going to slide along, kind of stir, bust up the ground. That's what comes with this particular wheel hoe, is these little Cultivation Fingers, which can be slid around at different points. You've got all these, you've got indexed slots on here. Let me pull back down here so you can see. But you can slide these things to various points. You could even buy extras and mount other ones. There's all kinds of different versatility built into this mount with all these holes and slots in there, so you can kind of get it set up specific to your row spacing. There's even a what they call a spreader bar, which is a bar that sticks out about yay far on each side. It's a big long bar with big long slots in it. And using that, you can position tools all the way across there, or, spread them out however you want it. But these things are great for working in, I think where they get used most in a lot of market gardens is in pathways. If you've got established raised beds and you need to do weed control in the pathways, a lot of times those pathways are narrow. You're talking 12 to 18 inches on most pathways if you're trying to maximize the amount of produce you can get out of an acre. And how do you even get your walk-behind tractor down those little narrow pathways when these things are often 2 feet wide? Well, a wheel hoe is great. You put a 12-inch stirrup hoe on that thing and just fast as you can walk up and down those paths and just slice those weeds off. You do it once a week and it doesn't take long.
There's a cedar attachment.
There's a cedar, which is right there. Haas developed their own cedar implement or attachment for the wheel hoe, which is really a good little cedar. I mean, we've had a lot of good reviews on it. They're not terribly expensive. They're about $150 for the cedar. But yeah, the little disc harrow, and you can index this thing to all kinds of different positions. They even spin around 180 degrees, but there's like five or six different places you can cock it here and put the pin back in. So whether the discs are going to always throw some soil sort of this way as they roll through the ground. So you can cock those and position them in such a way that it actually does some hilling for you. If you want to run next to crop and kind of throw soil up, or throw it back towards the middle and straddle a crop. So it's a pretty neat little thing. And especially if you're, the disc harrows are nice, especially on something small like this. We even have a little disc harrow to fit the walking tractor, and we'll get into that later. But disc harrows are a nice kind of gentle way to just slice up the soil a little bit, either to do a little weed control, It's just rolling discs, just non-power, just rolls along the ground and just cuts up the ground a little bit. But it's a great way to do some light weed control, or to just break the surface enough to get like a cover crop established. If you're wanting to, you've got one 30-inch bed, for example, that you want to get a cover crop in, you can just run up and down it with a disc harrow and just break up enough soil so that you can get some exposed dirt. Go out there, sprinkle your cover crop, and then just run it over it again with the disc harrow real quick, to just throw enough soil around to get some of that seed covered. So you have good seed to soil contact. The birds aren't going to come down and eat all your seed because it's slightly buried. And you didn't have to start a motor to do it. I mean, it's just as fast as you can run with these things, it'll just work.
How wide is that?
I think it's 15 inches wide total. Yeah. And changing implements on these little wheel hoes, it's 2 or 3 bolts. I mean, a 9/16 wrench is what you've got to have. There's all the tools have a stove bolt, or what's called a carriage bolt, on the bottom, so you don't require more than 1 wrench. That is, these things have this little like a squared off head that locks into a squared hole. So it's it locks in on the bottom, and you just tighten the bolt on top, or the nut rather. So real simple to change tools. But yeah, the little seeder that Haas started offering, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we've sold dozens and dozens of these things, and it's a neat little seeder. You got a chain drive, so it's positively driven. It's got the little spokes on the wheels back here, or little, however you want to call these, teeth that dig into the ground, so you get real positive action. You don't get the wheel dragging. And they've got a vertical axis seed singulator down here, or the plate. Anybody who's familiar with the Earthway seeders? Yeah. Okay, everybody knows what the Earthway are. They've been around for 50 years, I think, or at least 40. And they have a disc that rotates like this. So the disc is rotating on a horizontal axis and kind of scooping the seed out of the bottom of the hopper. And then it's got these little cups built into their plates. My dad's had an Earthway for 40 years. I mean, he's fought with that thing forever. And it's kind of one of those deals where you get what you pay for. I mean, if you pay $100 for a seeder, it works like a $100 seeder. And what the Earthway does more than anything else is it just throws a lot of seed in the ground. I mean, it overseeds like crazy. To make, Dad just taped over, a roll of duct tape is a must if you're going to own an Earthway, because you tape over half the holes on the seed plates. But then what happens is sometimes they jam and they just you don't hit anything for 3, 4, 5 feet. You get no germination at all because no seeds went in the ground. So it's just not terribly positive in terms of their whole seed singulation method. These guys use this disc that spins this way, so the seed is always laying on top of that disc. It doesn't have to be scooped up and drop into a little chamber to go down to the ground. All the seed is laying on top of that thing, and that disc is turning under it. So, and then there's holes in the disc. In fact, I've got a set of the discs here, right here. They're real simple, little plastic doohickeys.
Different size seeds.
For different size seeds. It comes with 6 plates. There's one for carrots or something. I mean, you can barely see the holes in that thing. So it comes with 6. There are 4 additional plates available as standard plates. And then the really cool thing about these, you can buy blanks. $5 a crack for blanks. And you drill your own holes. So if you want to change the seed sizing or spacing, you just get your blanks, drill holes. I mean, they sell a little template, which is almost a must. It's $12 for a template. The template is steel, and it lays over the disc, and the template gives you the correct spacing for how many seeds you want per. That way you're not guessing at how far apart should I make these if I want 7 or 8 seeds per rotation. So it has all the spacings right on there, and you just drill the spacing you want, and then you oversize those holes to the size you want. And man, it is just a slick system. And it's cheap. I mean, there are more precision seeders on the market. The Jiang Cedars, some of you may be familiar with the Jiang. That's a Korean-made seeder. They're usually yellow in color. Really nice seeders. But the problem with the Jiang is you get up to about an okra-sized seed, and that's where you need to stop with the Jiang. because even though they offer their little seed discs for corn and beans, everybody says the same thing. Don't use them for corns and beans because they jam. They'll jam the seeds in those little seed rollers and break the rollers or break the seeds, and they're just not effective. But for okra-sized seed and down, the Jiang is probably the most precise seeder on the market for the money. If you don't mind spending $400 per row unit, and for a push unit, that's not too bad. And if you're planting a lot of small seeded stuff, the accuracy of the Jiang is very, very good. It's probably 90 to 95% accurate in terms of seed placement. We don't sell the Jiang single row push units, but a lot of our growers use them. What burns you up on the Jiang, however, is those seed discs. They call them rollers. It's a little roller that inserts in there to drop the seeds. And you know, those rollers are 20 to 30 bucks a piece. So if you have a lot of different seed types, it really adds up in terms of the cost. And then if you get a multi-row Jiang, because they make 3-row and 4 and 6-row units, then you've got that roller times that many, so you really tie up some money in seed rollers. These things are just so basic, and they're good. I mean, the accuracy of this Haas seeder is probably 70% overall. An Earthway is like 50% or less. These are like 70, 75% accurate, and they're so cheap to maintain in terms of buying the plates, and they're so versatile in being able to, you know, just make your own plates. It's a hard system to beat. And they work well with both small and large seeds. I mean, this is just as accurate and as effective with beans as it is with carrots. So it might not be as precise as the Jiang for that specific seed size, but overall it's just a more versatile unit and cheaper, 150 bucks. So we've talking about seeding and moving over. Yes.
We share our experience with the Haas seeder. We tried using it on really sandy soil, and it did not work well at all. The back wheel wouldn't grip. So if you have like, I think it would work great on heavier soil, but if you have like really sandy river bottom, the back wheel's not big enough to grip.
Good. That's a perfect segue into
which they've made a new version of, and I think it probably would work.
Right here.
But yeah.
Yeah. So Haas came out 2 years ago with a dedicated seeder. This is not the first seeder we talked about was an implement for the wheel hoe, but this Haas came out with these dedicated seeders. Typically, these are sold by Haas as a 2-wheeled unit. That is, it has 2 wheels this size, one in the front, one in the back, has a dedicated set of handles, and this is a dedicated seeder. So it's not a wheel hoe that you're going to put different implements on. It's just a garden seeder. Uses the same seed singulation system with the changeable plates and the plates you can adapt yourself and all that, but it has a much bigger drive wheel, as you can see, a lot better traction in softer soils. Also, we find that if you're in clay soils and the soils are a little wet, sometimes you get a buildup of soil on that little roller. This will shed the soil much more effectively. Well, and another important difference between these two is that because of the overall height of this little guy, they had to use just a regular furrow style opener. So this little wedge in the front is sliding through the soil and sort of opening up a little trench, and the seed is dropping into the ground right in the back here, and then this thing is just kind of dragging some soil in to cover it up. Well, if you are an organic grower and you've got cover crop residue in your soils, because of course you grow cover crops, right? This becomes a real pain because every now and then it just wads up a big wad of roots and material in front of this thing that hasn't quite decomposed in your soil, and you have to reach down there and flip it off because otherwise you're pushing around a mountain of stuff. So that any kind of a furrow style opener can be a little bit of a challenge in soils with higher levels of organic material. Well, Haas, by the time they had developed this, had developed their little disc harrow that we just looked at a minute ago. So they just used some of those discs to have disc type openers. So we've got rolling, I can't hardly hold this thing up, but rolling disc openers in the front. These guys. So they're mated together in the front, so they form a little V. So that opens up the ground, and any kind of trash you have in the soil in terms of roots or leftover cover crop material, the discs just roll over it. Still makes a furrow, but it rolls over it and sheds the stuff off, so you never get any buildup there. The height is adjustable on that rolling disc assembly by a little knob right up front here. There's a little black knob, and you just dial that knob up or down, and it incrementally moves that disc up or down within about a you know, about an inch range, which is typically plenty for most seeds. So what we did at Earth Tools, because we get so many calls about seeders, do you have seeders for my walk-behind tractor? Well, it's always been a challenge because, you know, we've taken some of the Jiang multi-row units and put them behind the walking tractors. But they're so expensive that a lot of people didn't want to deal with them. They just won't handle a big enough variety of seed sizes. So when Haas came out with this thing, I was like, okay, we need to work on this. So we did this. This is the prototype, what you're looking at right here. This is not available for sale until next week because we got our first batch back from the fabrication shop finally. So I need to get them put on the website. But this is a multi-row seeder setup for a walk-behind tractor based on the Haas, you know, professional garden seeder. So we got the disc openers, we got the big wheels in the back, and we're going to offer it with a 40-inch toolbar, and you can put up to, the row density can be as little as 7 inches apart on this thing. So you can get, on a 30-inch bed, you can actually get 5 rows. It'd be pretty close to the edge, but 4 rows would be a little more comfortable. Yes?
Not for an ATV, but for like a Rotor Tiller like a Troy built, could they make an attachment where that would rig up to the back of a, you know, Rotor Tiller, you know, the drive wheels pull? Because that takes very little force to pull that.
Yeah, I know.
You know, if they could have it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we haven't exactly introduced what a walk-behind tractor is yet, but essentially that's what it is. So I guess I'll back up here and start over again. I just segued into that because we were talking about seeders. But I'll back up over here and shove this piece of equipment out into the limelight. Walk-behind tractor. So, and of course I've got the PowerPoint presentation upstairs on these things, which we could talk, you know, when we're totally exhausted with the sun, we'll go up there and watch that. But this is the down and dirty machine that's actually been used. And the walk-behind tractor is a concept that essentially goes back almost 100 years, okay? One of the first walk-behind tractors that was commercially produced was actually built here in America. It was an American entrepreneur, a guy named Gravely in West Virginia, who built one of the world's first walking tractors. There were some other versions being produced other places in the world, and America also had some other producers of walk-behind tractors. But the concept, I mean, Mr. Gravely built his first machine, I think, in 1918. So next year it'll be 100 years. And what's interesting is that the Gravely company has gone away now. They failed to innovate, and they just were blown away by the European competition. But the walk-behind tractor is the same concept as a four-wheel tractor. It's not a rototiller. It is a rototiller because you can put a rototiller implement on it, right? But it's a tractor because you can put 50 other tools on it, just like a four-wheel tractor. What is a four-wheel tractor? A four-wheel tractor is absolutely useless by itself, right? You can buy a tractor, you can drive it around your farm all day and not do a lick of work, because what does the work on the tractor is the implement that's on the back of it or the front of it. It's a power source for implements. That's what it is. This is the same thing. It's a multi-tool. You have one motor, one transmission, one drive system, multiple implements. This one is equipped with a quick coupling system, which has not been serviced well. So this is going to be challenging to get off probably because this flail mower hasn't been off of here in a while. It's coming. We'll have maybe a section on walk-behind tractor maintenance here at the end. Okay, so I've taken this implement off. Now I could plug my multi-row seeder on here, or my power harrow, or my bed shaper, or my crimper roller, or my potato digger, or my rototiller, or my seed drill, or my hay baler, which makes this bale. I brought this bale to demonstrate that it does make hay bales. My sickle bar, my bush hog, my power washer, my generator, my log splitter, my kitchen blender. No, I don't have that. And what makes the European walk-behind tractors Well, it makes them unique. It certainly set them apart from the Gravely machines. The Gravely machines of North America were configured just like this. That is, engine in the back, PTO in the front, handlebars over the engine. So all the Gravely implements were front mount, including their soil working implements. So they had a tiller, and they had a set of cultivators, and they had a moldboard plow, and they had a rotary plow, all kinds of soil working tools, but they were all in the front, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it, because you're tilling the bed or whatever, and then you're driving a tractor through there and leaving two big tire tracks. This is why tools go in the back of a farm tractor, because you want those tools, you want those tracks to be erased by the soil working tool you're using. By the same virtue, mowing implements or snow removal implements work a lot better in the front, because that way you're mowing or blowing the snow or raking the hay or whatever it is before the tractor wheels pass over it and mash it all down to the ground. So this makes sense from that configuration. So the Europeans said, starting about 1960, boy, it'd be cool if we just turn these handlebars around. So that's what they did. These handlebars rotate around in a few seconds. And we'll demonstrate that. This is a Grillo brand walk-behind tractor. We also distribute the BCS brand. BCS is a little better known in North America. They've been imported for a long time. Let's see, so it would be this lever here. Ta-da! I plug all these back in.
Are they both Italian made?
They're both Italian made. The Italians build a tremendous amount of walk-behind tractors. There is, actually, these are not configured properly. This is in the wrong hole. You can tell it's been used as a mower for a long time. How much is something like this? Walk-behind tractors range in price from, say, $1,600 up. You know, you can spend as much as $5,000 on a walk-behind tractor. Just depends on all the bells and whistles you want. Typically for a market gardening size tractor, I'm just not paying attention to what I'm doing here and getting these things routed wrong. The typical market gardening size tractor is in the $3,000 to $4,000 range. You know, to have a good, good versatile tractor that'll handle the largest range of implements that you need for market farming.
And that's just the tractor.
That's just the tractor. That is correct. So, yeah. But for a lot of small farmers, it's a way more practical investment than dumping $15,000 into a Kubota that once your beds are established, you can't even get near the beds because it's going to ruin things and compact everything. And, you know, or if you do set up your farm so that you can get a bigger tractor back in there to cultivate and do things throughout the growing season, then you're going to have a lot bigger row spacing. I mean, you've got to leave room for a tractor. So the Walkman tractor lets you grow a lot more food on a small piece of acreage because you can just maximize the amount of, or you minimize the amount of wasted space. So now that that's all properly configured, it won't take so long to turn around next time. But yeah, there it is, turned around to the soil working mode. A lot of the early American walking tractors were fairly crude machines. There were at least a dozen different manufacturers. We'll see them in the PowerPoint up there. I've got some antique photos. A lot of them were just very crude tools. That is, it was just an engine and a set of wheels and handlebars. There wasn't even a power takeoff. Power takeoff is like the shaft that can drive things. So those older walking tractors were really just a motive. They were a tractive source of power to pull a plow or pull a cultivator or push a dozer blade or something like this. They weren't advanced enough to actually PTO drive implements, so they didn't run any kind of rotary implements. Gravely had a PTO shaft. Gravely was way ahead of its time. I mean, it was amazing. The Americans did a great job with that, and it's really a shame that they never really changed their product. They never made it so you could reverse the handlebars on the Graveleys. And as a result, the Italians just kind of blew Gravely away eventually, and Gravely built their last walk-behind tractors in 2003. I mean, our business was incredible in 2003. That is, walk-behind tractors were selling well here in North America, but Gravely was just like, we're building the same thing we've built since 1950, and people bought it then, why won't they buy it now? Well, guess what? They didn't. You know, their last production year, they built 250 tractors. That was it. And the company that bought Gravely, which was Aaron's, they just shut the line down. They said, we're not fooling with this anymore. But any of these modern Italian machines, you know, they're all gear drive. There's not a belt or chain on this machine. It's built with the quality and durability that you would find in a four-wheel farm tractor. So when you make the investment in a machine like this for $3,000 or $4,000, this particular model right here is $29.50 with these wheels on it, on a brand new one. You know, this is something that, you know, will work on a market garden for 20, 30 years. If you're a homeowner and investing in this to take care of your various needs on a small farm or homestead, and you're not using it commercially, it could easily last into the next generation. And I see that all the time because my dad started selling BCS tractors in 1977. So it's 40 years now that our family's been in this business. And I am now dealing with the next generation of owner. That is, the people my dad sold to, their machines have gone to their children, and now I'm selling parts to them. And the tractors are still running, often on the same transmissions. Yes?
On like a market or a production scale, like what max acreage do you think this thing can handle?
So the PowerPoint covers that, but briefly covering it, vegetable gardening, you know, mixed vegetable type gardening, 1 to 3 acres. You know, and smaller acreages too are fine. But I wouldn't typically go above about 3 acres if you're relying solely on walk-behind tractors. And there's a lot of hybrid farms we deal with, you know, 10-acre, 5-acre vegetable farms or somewhere in between, 15-acre, whatever. And they're hybrid farms. That is, it's not just walk-behind tractors and it's not just full-size tractors, it's a mix. Because there are some jobs when you're dealing with larger acreages that you're better suited using a bigger tractor, like your initial ground prep. They'll run through there with a spader or something and do the ground prep fast, maybe have a 40-inch power harrow, they've, you know, doing a bed shaper for the big tractor. But then once the plants are established and those beds are established and things are going, the big tractor is out, it's excluded. So they bring in the walk behind. If they want to take out this bed of what used to be lettuce and put something else in there, they're not going to bring the big tractor back in, tramp all over all the other beds that are there. You just bring the walk behind in, you work up the top of that bed, you know, do the flail mowing in between the pathways, whatever. You know, there's a ton of things that a walk behind is going to be able to do that the big tractor's not able to do. And again, you know, if you getting the farm, like the beds set up in the spring, you can get your bed density pretty high using bigger equipment if the big equipment doesn't have to come back in there later. You just rely on the walk behind coming back in there later. So it lets you, again, maximize that efficiency of ground. Yeah, and you know, I've got some farms, like there's one 5-acre farm we deal with that has, they don't use a full-size tractor. They only have walk behinds, but they got 2. You know, so they're splitting the load up between the 2, and some even have 3. I've got some farms with 3 walk-behind tractors. I mean, for the work these things do, you know, based on the scale they work on, it's not a tremendous investment. You know, if you've got 4 acres of vegetables to buy 2 of these things, it's still cheaper than a Kubota. So, and it'll go places that a Kubota can't go. I mean, if you're having to deal with deer fencing, which a lot of people in the East are having to deal with, which I have to deal with, you know, getting a full-size tractor maneuvered around inside deer fencing is a nightmare. So if you have 2 choices. You either lose 15 feet at the end of your row, which is necessary to make a 3-point turn with your full-size tractor, or you have a walk-behind tractor to get in there and you can get within 4 feet of the fence. So, because it only takes 4 feet to turn these things around at the end of the row.
Is that the tiller there?
No, there is no tiller here. Everybody knows what a tiller is, right? So I didn't bother bringing a tiller.
It's a new phone.
Throw it
I'm
away.
asking this because where I live, I'm in Marshall, we got rocks.
Yeah.
Right? I'm in the hills there.
Yep.
Lots of rocks.
Yep.
And I run my full-size farm tractor, you know, with the disc and all that. But like you said, you can't get in there once the crop is planted.
Right.
Is there a slip clutch on the?
Yeah, there's a main clutch on the tractor.
So when you do hit like a rock with the tiller, it won't snap a...
No, nothing's going to break. There's no shear pins in these things. You've got a slip clutch. Yeah, I mean, there's got plenty of rocks in Europe, believe me. And so they designed it is agricultural equipment, so it has to be designed with things like that in mind. And there are different implements that work better than others in rocky soils. I mean, tillers can be a challenge in rocky soils just because of the way a tiller rotates, it has a tendency to get jammed in there if you get the right size rocks. So, I mean, we're going to talk about different tillage techniques, so we'll kind of get to that. And I guess, let's see, I guess starting we ought to, oh, the rotary plow is actually behind you. So I'm going to walk over there and grab that plow. And I'm going to carry it out here. Yeah, it's about 116 pounds. But it's not the end of the world. So this, we'll kind of start at the beginning like we did with the hand tools, that is initial ground prep. So if you're breaking new ground, if you've just purchased a farm and you need to go out here and bust sod, you're going to need something to get down in there and, you know, get rid of that sod and aerate, do some initial aeration. And the rotary plow is a tool that was actually first adapted to a walk-behind tractor by Gravely in the 1940s. Rotary plows existed before then, but they were larger things on full-size equipment. I've even seen a horse-drawn rotary plow from the 1800s. That was crazy. But the concept is the same. You've got these kind of fluted blades on there. It looks like the bottom end of a post hole digger, you know, an auger. It's typically oriented like this. Let me get this transport wheel off of here so the thing will sit up on its own. Ooh, I can tell this thing has spent some time outside. So typically it's oriented like that. So that auger is turning like this as the tractor moves it forward. So we would plug this thing on right to the back of the tractor. This little quick hitch has got quite a bit of rust on it, so I'm not going to try to plug it in there right now. That needs to be sanded down and greased, part of the maintenance class. So what this thing is doing is kind of drilling itself into the ground, because it is like an auger, and it's discharging the soil out the side immediately. So the soil, as this thing turns, the soil travels up. Let's see, how can I do this? Aha, brilliant. Like so. So the blade, as it's going across the front, this thing is moving forward, that blade is digging into the ground, it's picking up the soil, and by the time the blade gets around to this side, that soil has reached the top of the ramp, and it gets discharged centrifugally out the side. So the soil doesn't get trapped under the hood and beat and beat and beat and beat like it does with a rototiller. It's sliced and discharged. So you end up with a larger soil curd, okay? You get more chunks in the soil, which is actually much more forgiving and better for the soil biology as a whole. You're not atomizing the stuff. And it's amazingly effective. I mean, I can take it out here in this sod and it'll go 10 to 12 inches deep on the first pass. There's no other soil working tool on a walk-behind piece of equipment that will come anywhere close to that. And it's a self-anchoring tool. It's drilling itself down into the ground and doing the work through the PTO shaft. That is, the engine power is being fully utilized by the PTO. We're not relying too much on the wheels, because a moldboard plow, which, you know, slides along the ground, has the curved blade to flip the soil over, is dependent completely on how much wheel traction you have. Therefore, you have to have a really heavy machine to drag that thing through the soil, slice it, and flip it over. This thing's doing it all by PTO power. The tractor doesn't have to weigh that much at all. So you can do very effective, deep primary tillage with a relatively lightweight tractor. I mean, I can put this on a 10 horsepower machine and I can go 12 inches deep in sod with a machine that weighs, you know, 350 pounds. Going over it a second time doesn't really do anything. It doesn't do anything extra. That is not going to break it up finer, because it just spits the soil right out the side. So in clay ground, like I've got in Kentucky, and probably you have several places here like that, you know, if you break sod, you're going to have some, you know, good-sized chunks, fist-sized chunks of where that clay has got root wads in it. But what's interesting about the rotary plow, the company who adapted it to the Italian walk-behind tractors, which is a company called Berta, you can see the name right across here, Berta. Everybody thinks that's just the name of the plow. Oh, it's Bertha. You know, there's so many of these things named Bertha on farms, even though it says Berta, there's no H in it. But Berta adapted these things to the European walk-behind tractors back in the 1970s. And they really carefully researched and tested and perfected what Gravely had started, but they really nailed it in terms of getting the overlap of the blades right, the angle of the blades right, to minimize the impact of rocks. I mean, it's amazing how many customers are just amazed by how this thing handles rocks. I mean, you know, one guy called me back from Maine. He says, this thing rolls out basketball-sized rocks and you hardly feel it. And it's true. You know, we've got these limestone plate rocks in Kentucky, and it's, yeah, you'll feel a little vibration sometimes, but it's amazing what it'll unearth. Sometimes it'll just spit the rock out like, bing, it'll go 10 feet out the side. But in terms of also figuring out the geometry of how that soil gets flipped, because when you're dealing with sod that has to be eliminated to start a gardening operation, of course, one way to do it is just cover it all with mulch or black plastic or whatever and just kill it that way. But if you're needing to mechanically get rid of it faster, it has to be buried. And typically it should be upside down. You know, that really kills it fast. Well, that's what a moldboard plow would do. It would slice and flip that soil over. The rotary plow flips it, but it doesn't completely put it at the bottom. They've figured out the geometry of how the soil moves on this thing to where whatever's on the top of the ground gets buried halfway down in the tilth upside down. So if you go out here and break sod and you dig back through there and find your sod, that's where it is. It's roughly halfway down in the tilth, mostly upside down, like 90% of it. There's obviously bits and pieces scattered throughout, but that's where the bulk of it is. So it's nice. It's not all the way at the bottom where it's going to kind of create a slime mold situation down there. And it's not, you know, close enough to the top where it's going to resprout. And they got the geometry so perfect on it, in fact, that about 8 years ago, they decided they were going to make a smaller version that would work on a smaller tractor, because this one needs about 10 horsepower to run it. And they said, well, it'd be nice if we could run it with 6 or 8 horsepower, because there's a lot of people with smaller machines. They couldn't do it. By cutting the size down 20%, it wouldn't work. They couldn't get the geometry right to where it would flip that soil and do the same thing. So they're like, okay, they threw up their hands and just said, this is it, one size fits all. So, but a lot of people have discovered that with the rotary plow, you can exploit the fact that it throws soil to the side, okay? Because it's centrifugally discharging that soil over to the right side as it works. So if you're opening up a new patch of ground, you start at the middle, like down the center, and you work your way out, always throwing back toward the middle. That way there's not an unplowed strip in the middle and everything's plowed. Well, people figured out real quick that, okay, if I take this soil that's already worked and run it back through here, it's going to throw more soil up into a heap. So you run down this way, you throw it up this way, you come back this way and throw it up this way, and all of a sudden you got a really nice raised bed with zero labor. I mean, and it is sweet. And now folks like Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener dude from Quebec, that's what he based his entire raised bed system on, is this tool. He bought it from us in 2008, fell in love with it. He had been building raised beds by hand before then. This cut the labor in about 1/100th. And, you know, it's just amazing what they'll do. And you can make raised beds of virtually any size. We've found from about 24 inches up to 48 inches wide. It just depends on how close you make your 2 passes. But the plow will, at maximum engine throttle, throw the soil 2 feet past the edge of the cover. So 2 feet from one side and 2 feet from the other side is 4 feet. And I've built 4-foot wide raised beds.
It's making a trench.
It's making a trench and it's throwing the soil over. So what you would typically do is you'd work your whole field first with the rotary plow, if that's what you were relying on, if you didn't have larger equipment for your initial ground prep. So everything was worked. Everything's 12 inches deep, right? Worked soil. Then you come back with your rotary plow and you're essentially establishing your foot pads, right? So you're throwing the soil from what's going to be the path up into what's going to be the bed. Now you have 16 to 18 inches of worked soil in your beds, which the plants just love that. You know, it's just more loose soil to get their roots down into, more aerated soil. And then you can use the rotary plow. You know, eventually those beds will slump down. You know, erosion will finally bring them back into the pathway. So you just trim up the edges every now and then and throw it back in. So, and they're just amazingly durable. I mean, we occasionally have somebody stick a rock in one or whatever. It's really hard to get a rock up in these because of the way that plowshare is swooping around in a circle. You know, it's always going to discharge stuff on this side. To pick up a rock and have it actually stick against to lock against the gearbox. The rock has to be picked up on the back side, and then it'll travel up far enough. And you've got to be a rock just the right shape, just the right size, and picked up just at the right point in the rotation. Well, we've sold like 2,000 of these over the past 15 years, so we are getting some reports of, yeah, I stuck a rock in there now. There's just a probability level out there, you know.
Clutch would just slip.
Yeah, you'll typically hear the clutch slip, and it'll stall the engine. It'll go and stall the engine. And so you start it back up, and you get the rock out first, then you start it back up and you go back to work. Yeah, and the clutch will slip before any damage is done to the internals of the tractor, but it'll typically kill the engine as well because it's just too much load for the clutch. But the clutch is absorbing that impact, see? And the same with a tiller or any other tool that you jam, it's, the clutch is going to absorb that impact. So, but the Rotary Plow kind of revolutionized, in a way, what you could do with a walk-behind tractor, because it was the first advent of a really effective primary tillage tool. Before then, people were either relying on a little moldboard plow, which we do sell for these things, but they just weren't that effective because the tractors don't weigh enough. Even if you hang a bunch of wheel weights on the tractor to increase the weight of the tractor, you still have a relatively lightweight machine here that's not going to be effective, not going to be super effective on tractive type operations. With wheel weights on it, it weigh 500 pounds, but that's not much when it comes to moldboard plowing. I mean, one little rock, you're stopped, sitting there spinning your wheels. Or you would use a rototiller for primary tillage, which it will work. I can put a rototiller on this thing and go out here and work sod, but guess what? I'm going to have to make 3 or 4 passes over it to get to maximum depth. And by the time you've done that, you've beat that soil to death, and you've probably created a hard pan at the bottom of it because of that smearing action of the rototiller tines through the ground. So this changed all that. It let a very lightweight piece of equipment do very effective, not only soil breaking, but also bed building. So that was a cool thing.
Is there a plastic mulch attachment or anything like that?
Yeah.
There is?
Yeah.
And drip tape?
Yep. So, yeah, we'll get to that on the PowerPoint. But so that's your primary tillage tool based on a walk-behind tractor. If you're in clay soils particularly, this is just not going to make it fine enough to go out there and plant lettuce. There's just no way. I've got customers in like northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin with this black peat moss muck soil, that you can run a rotary plow through sod and go out there and rake it with a rake and plant lettuce, but most of the planet is not dealing with that, right? So in my soils in Kentucky, if I go out and bust sod with this, I'm going to usually let it sit a week or two so that sod dies out well, and I'm going to run either a tiller or a power harrow across the top of that soil. Don't have to go real deep. This has done the deep work. We don't want to make that soil fine any deeper than we need to. We want to keep that structure intact. So the power harrow, tillers first. Tillers, of course, have been around for a long time. Probably 100 years now that people have been using rototillers. And the rototiller is always the same design. It's a horizontally mounted shaft with hooked tines on it that are turning like this. And it's just churning up the soil this way. So rototillers have gotten a bad rap in a lot of publications, and a lot of farmers come down on tillers because you can really do serious soil structure damage with a tiller. The reasons being, one is the hard pan I mentioned earlier. With a rototiller tine, you have this curvature of the tines moving through the soil. Okay, it's a kind of a hooked tine like this, so it's going like this as it turns around. Well, as the thickness of that tine moves through the soil, it's pushing soil out of its way. Some of that soil gets moved to the inside of the tine, some of it gets pushed to the outside of the tine because we got to make room for this 1/4-inch blade to slide through there. The soil had to go somewhere. Well, the soil that's on the inside of the blade gets scooped up and mixed around and thrown back on the ground. The soil that's on the outside of that blade gets just pushed to the side. Now, if that soil happens to be on the front edge of the curvature, of course, it's going to be chopped up next time. But at the very bottom of the tilth, that soil that gets stuff that got moved out of the way gets polished, and you get this repeated impact. And man, if you think a moldboard plow is bad about creating a hard pan, a tiller's 10 times worse. Why? Because it's turning 10 times as fast. The plow is moving this fast. The tiller's moving this fast as you move this fast. So it's many more impacts and rotations per foot of travel. So if you're in clay soils, the rototillers will just create a tremendous hard pan. It's just a nightmare. Now, if you're coming back later, I mean, there are different things you can do to minimize the effects of hard pan with a tiller. One is vary your tilling depth from year to year, you know. Another is don't till very deep. That is, if you're using your tiller as just your topical application for breaking up your seed bed and making the seed bed nice, fine, just go 2 or 3 inches deep. If you're using some other method like the rotary plow or a spader that I mentioned earlier, or a broad fork, if you're doing, you know, that scale of gardening, you're going deep enough to break up that hard pan with some other method, and your tiller isn't going that deep anymore. So you're essentially kind of curing your soil.
Like training wheels would also work to keep the weight of the tractor off of the weight of the tractor on the tines off of the hard pan.
So you gauge wheels is what you're saying, some kind of wheel system. Yeah, we do offer that for the tillers. We have a little gauge wheel for the back of them that we developed. We also tried putting a mesh roller like is on the back of this power harrow on the tiller, but we found that didn't work because it just fills up with soil immediately because the tiller is discharging the soil back, and it just fills that thing up, and all of a sudden you can't lift it out of the ground. So we're still thinking we're going to adapt a roller to the back of the tiller, but it's going to have to be a solid roller rather than an expanded mesh roller. That way it won't fill up. Another thing that tillers get a bad rap about is just their overall level of soil pulverization. And this is caused, by and large, and a lot of people don't realize this, it's caused by more of the throwing action of the tiller tines than the slicing action of the tiller tines. And let me explain that. So the rototiller tines are making this curve through the soil. On the whole bottom edge of the curve, the tines are in the soil. They're submerged in the ground. But at the upper part of the curvature, they're up out of the ground. Okay? The tine shaft, you know, may submerge below the ground a little bit, but still the upper curvature of those tines, it's coming up out of the ground, having to go back into the soil in the front. Where that soil gets thrown up is the reason that they have a hood over the rototiller. It's not just so you don't put your foot in it. Of course, it's there for that in large part, but it's also because you don't want to get covered up with soil. And a rototiller with a reasonably fast rotation speed on the tines throws soil like 2 or 3 feet in the air. I mean, it just throws soil everywhere. So that hood being there keeps that soil from covering up all your plants and everything else. Well, guess what? When the hood is that close to the tines and the tines are throwing soil that hard, that impact against that hood is what does a lot of damage to your soil structure. Because especially if the soil is on the dry side, that impact is kind of an uncontrolled impact, right? We know how many times, just based on the ratio of how fast that thing is turning and how fast the wheels are moving, we can figure, okay, this time's going to come down here, and this time's going to come down here, and this time's going to come down here. And if you measure how far the tractor moved forward with each rotation of the tines, you can figure out how big a chunk you're going to make that ground into, okay? That's the size of the chunk. Well, when it hits that hood, it just gets busted up into dust. And dust is what you don't want in soil profile. Dust is what packs down like concrete. You know, when the soil is reduced to dust, all the capillary action is gone. Your soil structure is just completely degraded. And you get a good rain and it packs down like concrete because that's what you made. It was Portland cement. So the tiller has that impact factor going for it. And, you know, it's, well, going for it. It's not a good thing. It's going against it. But, you know, you can reduce that as easy as this. Throttle back. Don't use the tiller at maximum throttle. If you reduce the speed of the tines, you're reducing the impact, that is, you're reducing the centrifugal force of that soil throwing up against the underside of my hood. Once I understood that about tillers, I started tilling slower in my own garden, because I've used a rototiller in my garden for over 20 years. But when I cut back on the throttle speed to about half, it's amazing. The soil comes out larger. I mean, it's just a slightly larger curved soil structure. It's not beat up so bad. So you can minimize that.
So the rotary toe like that, it's just throwing it out.
It just throws it out. it never retills anything.
That's right.
And it doesn't have any of that impact based on centrifugal force.
How was the grain size of that coming out compared to like a conventional rototiller?
Oh, much larger.
Much larger.
Yeah. And like I say, this is a primary tillage tool. This isn't even made for seed beds. This is just to bust up your soil initially. You got to come back with something else to usually make your seed bed. So it's the choice between a rototiller and something like a power harrow. Now the harrow, move into the harrow now, it's the ultimate. The power harrow, and we'll stand this thing up on its end here so you can see the underside of it. I'm not going to lift this one up. This thing is heavy. So, it's also rotary. We'll get this dirt and stuff off of here. The power harrow has rotary tines that are turning on a vertical axis, multiple vertical axes in this case. And of course, this is normally lying down, so these tines are turning this way, like an egg beater. So what you're doing with this is, number one, you're not mixing the soil layers at all. If you're into, ultimate soil health, you don't want to mix the topsoil with the bottom soil. Tillers do that. Which is a plus and minus. I'll get back to that in a little bit. But this thing has no choice. It's not going to mix the soil layers. It's going to stir the soil. Even if you go to maximum depth here of 5 inches, what was at 5 inches deep is still at 5 inches deep, including all the weed seeds that were down there. So you're not bringing that stuff up to the surface. So very little soil biological function is disturbed. The tines never exit the ground. That is, once they're down in the soil, they stay working at that depth. They're not coming up out of the ground and going back in. So there's none of that centrifugal throwing around and impact ricochet action of soil bouncing off a hood. So what you find is that with a power harrow, you can run over the same piece of soil many more times in the calendar year and not do severe soil structure degradation. With a tiller, you've just got to really be careful, because if you over-till it, and with a market gardening situation, it's easy to do because, okay, I've got lettuce in here now, and I'm going to put carrots in there in 2 months, and I'm going to put radishes in there after that, and you keep these beds working year-round, and some of these crops are they're in the ground 6 or 7 weeks, and you're harvesting baby carrots and things like that, and you're throwing another crop in there, so you got to work that soil again. And the power harrow enables you to do that just more consistently without turning your soil to bug dust, as they say.
How's the power harrow for like weed control?
It's awesome for weed control. It just uproots everything. Yeah. As long as you can get a narrow enough one. The depth control system of the power harrow is this mesh roller in the back. The mesh roller is hooked up to this screw crank, and you just crank the thing up or down. So it's just cranking that roller up or down. And with that system, you are precisely measuring the depth of the penetration. You can get it anywhere from 1/4 inch to 5 inches deep in essentially 1/4 inch increments. So if you want to do, have you ever heard of stale bedding? Anybody? It's when you basically, you till a piece of ground or work a piece of ground and then let that seed bank germinate and then cultivate it off of there somehow. And some people do it with flame weeders, and it's kind of, you're getting that first emergence of weeds, and then you plant your crop. And it doesn't have any weed pressure to deal with because you're not reworking the soil. But this is great for stale bedding. You set it at 1/4 inch and run across the top of the bed, and you scrape off all those top weeds and not bring up any more weeds. So you're not going to re-expose a bunch of weed seeds to where they can germinate. So, and the mesh roller in the back also does just a beautiful job kind of tamping and perfectly leveling that soil. So if you want to come back and do any kind of precision multi-row seeding equipment, you've got a perfectly flat and firm bed. Because one thing precision multi-row seeders don't like is fluffy soil. If it's fluffy, they tend to get bogged down in it, and they just don't want to work well. So you need the soil firmed up a little bit. And like Johnny's Tools makes a roller that you can roll across the top of your bed to mash it down. Well, guess what? There's a roller built right into this tool, so it's done. So it's not only your precision depth control, but it's a perfect bed finishing tool. The power harrows are a lot more expensive than tillers. You're looking at 3 to 4 times the cost on the implement by itself. So they're not for everybody. So if you're a starting market farmer and you're on a limited budget, you might want to get by with the tiller. I mean, you can still use a rototiller. Your rototiller still is a viable tool for gardening. You just have to be more careful with them. You don't want to over-till your soil, till at minimum throttle, till at minimum depth. And I'll come back into here to the one thing that really sets the tiller and the power harrow apart in terms of a job that the tiller will do and the power harrow won't. And this is when it comes to cover crop management. So if you have a cover crop that you're growing on your bed and you want to get it punched into the soil, for example, you want to, you're going to grow lettuce here, and you can't have a cover crop residue on top of the ground. So you're going to run something across the top of that bed like a flail mower. That's another tool that we have yet to get to, but I'll allude to it now. The flail mower is a tool that completely masticates the material, so it grinds it up really fine so it can decompose quickly. So you run your flail mower across the top of the bed. Okay, it's all shredded up nice. Now we've got to get that work down into the soil so that we can run our seeder across it. Well, you find that a power harrow just sucks when it comes to that. Because guess what? We like this tool because it doesn't mix the soil layers. It just goes this way. But guess what? It doesn't mix the soil layers, which means when you've got a surface residue and you're trying to punch that into the ground, it doesn't do it. It pushes it around in circles and leaves it right there on top. I've broken sod with the power harrow. It does a fantastic job of tearing up sod, but it leaves it all right on top. You can go over it 5 times and it'll leave it right on top. It'll be shredded, but it'll be on top, and eventually it would reroot. So the power harrow is not a great choice for that vertical integration that you need sometimes on a market farm situation to get that residue worked down into the soil profile. A tiller works great for that. You just, when I'm tilling in a cover crop, I'll flail it, and then I'll run the tiller usually just 1 inch to 2 inches deep. It doesn't need to be very deep at all. You just need to get enough soil mixed with that cover crop residue that the microbial action starts working on that stuff and breaks it down quickly. It's got to get just covered with a little bit of soil. And then wait, you're going to wait a week or two. And of course you can cover it with a silage tarp, which some of these books talk about, to really speed up the microbial action. But yeah, that's the one challenge of the power harrow. And we have some guys who use the power harrow anyway for that. It's just, it doesn't cover it as effectively. I mean, if you run across it with the power harrow on a cover crop residue like that, it's going to stir a little bit of soil up and cover a little bit of that crop, but it's not going to be as effective as a tiller. And maybe they're just going to cover it with a silage tarp and just wait an extra few days. If you let time work on it a little longer, you can get by without the mechanical aid of the rototiller punching it in. So it all depends on your scheduling. And in fact, in Jean Martin's book, when he talks about cover crop management and getting these cover crops into his bed system, it's interesting because what he does, he's adding a lot of compost. He's not relying entirely on cover crops for his soil fertility. But when he does do a cover crop, what he's doing is he's integrating that at a time, he's scheduling it into his bed system at a time when that bed probably needs to be reformed anyway, because that bed is say it's been in production for 2 years and the sides are starting to slump down into the pathways. So he says, oh, that bed's going to need, maintenance. So you put a cover crop on it, and then he runs the flail mower over it, shreds it up. Then he uses the rotary plow to spit that soil from the pathways back on top of the bed, which covers that cover crop residue with soil. Then he throws a silage tarp over it and sits there for a couple weeks, and he pulls it off and bang, it's ready to go. Runs the power harrow over it, throws the seed in the ground. But he also admits in his book, if you kind of read between the lines, and I've talked to him about this in person, that he has an old Troy-Bilt tiller that he hauls out sometimes when he doesn't get the timing right. There's sometimes that all the factors just didn't work. It rained or it didn't rain, or this person was off and this didn't get done. And he had to get that cover crop turned into that bed. So he breaks out the old tiller and just does it, because sometimes there's no substitute. If you don't have time on your side and your scheduling didn't work, you just, you use the tools that are available. And one thing he's really good about it, one of the best things about Jean Martin's book, I think, is how he makes such a point of the importance of keeping records, which a lot of farmers are just bad about. They make the same mistakes, maybe not year to year, but 3 years later they might make the same mistake because they didn't write it down, what worked and what didn't work, and where this crop was this year, and how to rotate crops so you keep your pest problems at a minimum and things like that. Record keeping it's a big strength of his, and I think it's very important. It's one of the best lessons from his book, and he's meticulous about it. I think it's great. So so yeah, primary tillage, secondary tillage, seed bed forming, you know, weeding type stuff. And then of course we covered the bed forming slightly with the rotary plow, but another tool that is something we developed, actually we developed this for Elliott Coleman 12 years ago or something like this, is just a simple little bed shaper. And this is based on a design that you see on larger tractors, just some rolling discs. But typically these discs would be a little further out, and you would orient them in like this. That is, the leading edge of the disc as you pull it along would be wider, and as it rolled, it would be rolling that soil into the center to form up a bed. And these things are just very effective. It's amazing how well these things work. The drag chain in the back is critical. This trails behind it, and so what the discs are doing is rolling up two ridges, one on each side, and the drag chain just dragging along the ground like this is just kind of gathering those ridges in and leveling the top of the bed off. And it does a fabulous job for a really simple tool. So for example, if you have a larger piece of equipment that you're using for your initial ground prep, and therefore don't need a rotary plow to go out there and break sod, then it's not worth buying a rotary plow just to form raised beds. I mean, that's a $1,200 tool. And if all you're gonna do with it is build raised beds, it's really not practical. This thing builds raised beds just fine for 500 bucks. And frankly, it's faster because it makes both sides of the bed at once. With a rotary plow, you gotta run up one side, turn around, come back on the other side. And guess what? Until you get good at directing that rotary plow, you're not going to have straight beds. Because both those passes have to be parallel to each other if you want a consistently 30-inch wide bed. This thing, the two sides are being formed at once. It's on one frame. So one pass is going to give you a 30-inch wide bed, period. Now, if you can't drive in a straight line and you're doing this, you're going to have an S-shaped 30-inch wide bed, but it's still going to be 30 inches wide end to end. With the rotary plow, you can have a bed that looks like this. Real easy. I mean, you get good at it eventually, and it's a very good idea to use stakes, you know, stake out your beds so you have something to aim for, but still, you're going to have some variation until you get good with it. Yeah, you just adjust the... Right, exactly. I mean, these shanks are fully adjustable. They twist, they adjust up and down. The shanks just slide up and down in the clamps. Sure, it's just a regular toolbar system. I mean, there's nothing fancy about it. This same hookup hardware here, the drawbar in the front and the tool carrier behind that, are kind of a separate unit than the implement itself. You notice some of these other tools I have sitting here, like this potato digger plow, doesn't have any way to hook it up to the tractor. Well, that's because it hooks into that same tool carrier and drawbar. Sure. So this, you know, you just pull a pin on the front and you change the implement out on the back of that tool carrier. So you basically have to get one tool carrier and drawbar set up, and then the multiple implements plug into that are any of the implements made by this particular company, which is Aldo Biagioli, which means nothing to most people. But they have like 6 implements that plug into that same system. And this tool carrier is important for a lot of the tools. People say, well, why do I need this thing? Well, this T-handle is an angle adjustment. I don't know if you can see that, but as I crank this, I'm cranking this down. And if I crank it the other way, I'm cranking it up. So I'm changing the angle that the tool would be on the back of the tractor, because the back of the tractor has a fixed PTO point, and I'm changing the angle of the tool, okay, up or down. That's not so important on something like this, because these discs are round anyway. But if you get into something like this potato digger plow, the angle at which that is entering the ground makes a huge difference in its performance. You gotta get it about like this, so it'll start down into the ground. And then once the tractor starts rotating, or once it gets deep enough, it actually kind of levels itself off because the tractor leaned back some. But yeah, if you couldn't adjust that angle, you couldn't accommodate for the different size tractor wheels, that are available on these things. There's like 3 different size wheels. Same thing with your cultivators, you know, the drag type cultivator toolbar system. You've got to control that attack angle of your tool because that controls how aggressively it's cutting into the ground. So that's very important. Should also mention that the drawbar system here, the way the drawbar pins onto the front of this one actually isn't adjusted what I would consider right. Again, my warehouse guys just threw it together. But the drawbar is specific for the tractor brand you're hooking it to. So there's a different drawbar for the BCS and the Grillo, for example. And there's a different drawbar based on whether you have a quick coupling system or not, because that's optional on most tractors. And unfortunately, BCS and Grillo don't share the same PTO mount. In fact, of all 16 brands of Italian walk-behind tractors, none of them share the same PTO mount. It's highly aggravating. There's no They want you to buy their implements. Right, yeah.
All the implements are not interchangeable.
Well, what the implement manufacturers do is like what I just mentioned. This implement manufacturer offers this part right here. This is the part that hooks to the tractor. They offer that in 16 different configurations. So you can, the implement dealer can stock one tool, 16 drawbars, and fit everybody's tractor. Same thing with Berta and their rotary plow, you know, or let's say, I'm right here, so I'll talk about this. This is the mounting flange that hooks the power harrow to the tractor. That's changeable. These 2 bolts right here take it off. You can swap that, and you don't have to stock 20 different power harrows. You stock 20 different or 16 different flanges, 1 power harrow. So that's how the implement manufacturers deal with it. And we stock the various flanges and changeovers, so you know we make it work for our customers. But this drawbar system is just held on by a pin. You know, you can just pull this pin out real easy and change the drawbar if necessary, or swap the drawbar from tool to tool if you have to. But this is also important that it's not a rigid mount. You have to have a little bit of float here between the tractor and a pull type implement like this, because if you go along and you decide, oh, I'm getting crooked, I'm on a little bit of a hillside, I'm kind of crabbing down the hill, you need to be able to steer it back straight. And if this thing were rigid with the back of the tractor, just solid with it, then turning it means sliding that implement to the side, which is really hard to do when you're down in the dirt. You know, it just doesn't work that well. But if it's got a little pivot in there, and all it takes that little bit, you can actually cock the tractor and it'll pull it back straight, just like a trailer follows behind a truck. So it's the same thing. So and as far as weed control, you know, weed control with a walk-behind tractor is hard if you're talking about like a 30-inch bed system, because how do you get in between 4 or 5 rows of crop that are on that bed? So what we're developing this year, I mean, we've offered these Shank style cultivator systems for years where you have a typical, just a toolbar with gauge wheels. You know, these are wheels that hold it up off the ground a certain distance, and multiple shanks, and you can put like V sweeps on the bottom of the shanks so they work like a scuffle hoe essentially, and just slide along and slice the weeds off. But getting that set up precisely is always a trick. I mean, for example, if your beds aren't a precise 30-inch width from end to end, and if your rows aren't consistently spaced on top of that bed from end to end, then this type of cultivation system is just out the window. You're going to have to use a hoe, or you're going to have to mulch, or you know, use black plastic or some other weed control method. But you know, if you're basing it on a bed shaper that makes a consistent 30-inch bed, and we're slowly adapting the walk-behind tractors to deal with everything on that 30-inch bed system. For example, we've been offering axle extensions for several years now that can be installed on the tractor and allow the tractor to actually straddle a 30-inch bed. Okay, so your wheels, you got 32 inches between the wheels. The problem with those extensions has been, I mean, they work great. The problem is, for some jobs, you don't want the extensions on there. You know, I'm going to go out and mow my field, and I don't want the wheels a foot wider than the mower. That's a real pain in the neck when you're driving over material that hasn't been mowed yet, and it mashes it all down to the ground. So this year we developed adjustable axle extensions. So you pull a pin. I'll pull this extra pin off of here. So this would bolt onto the tractor hub, this would bolt onto your wheel hub, and then you just slide them together, and there's all these different adjustment holes. So You can slide them in to get as little as a 2-inch extension. Is that right? Yeah, right there. Or as much as a 8-inch extension on each side. So you can, again, straddle a 30-inch bed and then just pull a pin, you know, and it's easy enough. These tractors don't weigh much. So it's as easy as, you know, pull the pin, do that, slide the wheel, put the pin back in. I mean, you don't need a jack or anything like this.
How many tires can you get on that diameter wise?
Not much bigger than that. Yeah, there's only one size bigger than that. It's only like an inch larger.
So when you're straddling, I mean, the crop that you're...
That is a challenge, right? It's got to be a lower crop. You'd have to be cultivating. And the thing is, as you found out with your cabbage, if you get your...
Beautiful, my tractor. That's...
Well, yeah, but if your density is right on the crop you're growing, for example, something like spinach, once that plant gets big enough, it's going to be covering enough ground that the weeds really aren't going to be a problem anymore. You know, it's shading the weeds out essentially. So it's a lot of times it's that initial cultivation, you know, when the plants are really small, that's important to get that first crop of weeds out of there. And then you don't have to worry too much about it because the plants start filling in and you've already hit that first flush. So I don't expect that the low ground clearance we're going to have is a big issue, but we are also working on that. We are currently developing a set of what we're calling stilts. And the stilts are essentially a drop-down drive system that bolts onto the side of the tractor and drops the axle down 8 inches to increase the belly clearance under the tractor by 8 inches. And it'll be a chain drive to drop it down. Yeah, we had the first prototype and it just didn't work out right. The concept is right, but the clearance wasn't right because the stilt was just taking up too much space in the middle. It's kind of over the top of the bed. So we're moving the drive chains out to the outside of the wheels and putting the wheels on the inboard side. So we had to do some re-engineering because, you know, the axles on these things will only take so much pressure. If you get too far from the center point where your axle bearings are, it's just too much stress on the axle. And you start snapping things. So we're working on that, and we're also working on different cultivation options. What you see on this thing is a prototype, which we actually do have available for sale now, but this is a prototype adapter system to put the Haas wheel hoe tools on one of our cultivators. Because a lot of people wanted the stirrup hoes. They like these little V-sweeps. They like the hilling plows that are available from Haas. The disc harrow, I mean, they're all nice little tools, but they want to be able to do multiples at one time on a larger bed system. Well, here it is. For about 45 bucks, you buy an adapter set that enables you to put the Haas tools right on these things in multiples. So those are available now. We're also looking at finger Wieters. I don't know if any of you are familiar with finger Wieters, but it's like a rolling, it looks like a set of fingers that are on a circle. And they roll along, and they really do an interesting job of kind of cultivating, kind of like a tined cultivator does, that's just on a rotary basis. So, and they'll actually flip the weeds up out of the ground, doing minimal soil damage. You know, they're not really slicing, they're just kind of, it's almost like you're just going like that and just flipping the weeds up out of there.
With that weed control, can you penetrate the ground like maybe only 2 inches or something?
Oh,
so you're not
easily.
You're not, you know, it's just
Right. And that's all these Haas style systems, you wouldn't be going in a ½ an inch. Yeah.
So you're just getting the weed out.
Right. Just kind of slice, just like a stirrup hoe or a scuffle hoe.
The rocks, you know,
You're skimming over them.
you're skimming over.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about the finger Wieters. They're way forgiving in rocky soil because it just rolls over it.
That chain system, is that available for the raising? What you're telling me?
We're in prototype stage with that. I mean, I would say before we're in full production with that, it's going to be 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Really take off.
yeah.
I mean, I saw a tractor out in Hendersonville maybe a month ago. You know, you can see it's a specifically made tractor for the kind of crop I got, where it is way up.
Yep.
It'll straddle anything.
Right.
But, you know, you're talking, you know, $30,000, $40,000.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're thinking this stilt system would be maybe $700 or something like that. Yeah. And everything is scale appropriate. And I want to also talk about the scale appropriate nature of these tools. because we get a lot of calls at my business, people wanting to mechanize. Everybody wants a mechanical solution to their problem, right? But what it really comes down to at the end is you got to look at the practicality of the scale you're at and whether a mechanical solution is really the right thing to do. And I'm a big believer in appropriate technology. I don't think that everything should be mechanized. It's all scale dependent. So if you're on a market garden that's an acre, you know, like Jean Martin at an acre and a half, you know, he uses a wheel hoe, he uses a stirrup hoe, he spreads his compost on his beds by hand with a wheelbarrow. He's just not afraid to get out there and put a little muscle into it. And it works. And on that scale, at an acre and a half with a mixed vegetable crop of all these different crops coming in at different times and all the different, if you tried to mechanize most small mixed vegetable farms, it would be a complete nightmare because your spacing is different from bed to bed and your crops are different from bed to bed and your needs are different from bed to bed, and it's just insane. You grab a hoe and you go out there and you do the work. But if you tried to set up a mechanical weeding system that would do these carrots and these onions and this lettuce and this arugula, you're going to spend all your time changing parts on mechanical weeders, and 15 minutes down the bed, that's the easy part, but then 2 hours changing the tools for the next bed.
Because I have an acre and a half
of cabbage.
Yeah, but strictly cabbage. But I've learned you can't market. I mean, I do it myself.
Right.
And the marketing, the reality of it is you need diversity.
Yes.
You got to be diversity or you're killing yourself.
Right.
So you need rotation and maybe like 4 crops.
Yeah. And most market growers are 10 crops or a dozen crops. I mean, you know, so, you know, based on the scale, again, you know, we've got some of these market farms that are mixed vegetable market farms that are on 10 acres. And if you're on 10 acres, you certainly probably need to look into some mechanical weeding systems. But then there's that thing where, okay, if you're on 10 acres, you're probably not going to be basing all your equipment on walk-behind tractors either. You're going to be you've already invested in a 4-wheel tractor, so you might as well get the weeding equipment set up for a 4-wheel tractor because that's already out there. You know, there's already finger weeders available for those. We're adapting this stuff down to the walk-behind tractors, trying to keep it at a reasonable price, you know, because yeah, I could buy some cultivation systems from Holland right now that would fit on a walk-behind tractor and have the finger weeders and just be set up ready to go. It's like $2,500. It's like, geez, I could buy the tractor for that, and you can virtually. So we want to get that down to half that cost or less. So that's what we're kind of doing, this in-house modification. These cedars are going to run about $240 a row unit.
So that's like $500 there?
Right, plus the frame. The initial frame cost is $250 as well.
Full-size tractor, they're like $4,000.
Oh, I know, they're big money. Yeah, you can tie up some money in cedars really fast. And like I say, with the Jiang multi-row cedars, we already offer those, but you figure about $350 to $400 a row unit, plus all your roller costs, your little seed rollers. So these things at, you know, for a 4-row unit, we'd be talking about $1,200 essentially. You know, and it's feasible, it's doable, it's affordable for the small grower, and it's a very adaptable unit. So, and you know, digging potatoes, this is another example. We offer this very simple potato digger for the walk-behind tractor. To use it, you got to put a bunch of wheel weights on there to have the traction to pull the thing through the soil. But I use one of these every year in my own garden. I shot a video, it's on YouTube, on our website. You know, it works okay. Gets underneath the pan and lifts up the potatoes, even in my heavy clay soil. Now, sometimes in August, when it's time to dig, right, I gotta wait for a rain, because often in August is super dry and it's like, you know, it's like adobe out there in the ground. You need a pickaxe to get in the ground, so I gotta wait for a rain and then dig the potatoes. But it works fine. You know, I've used this thing for years to dig my potatoes, and it turns digging potatoes on a 200-foot bed from an, you know, like 2-day job until, you know, I dig them in 15 minutes and then we pick up for a couple hours.
So you flip it and then just walk along and pick them out?
Yeah, yeah. Usually I'll make 2 passes on a bed and, you know, stir them all up, but it does a great job. You get it adjusted right so the angle goes down under your plant and it lifts the potatoes up. I don't damage any more potatoes with this thing than I damage with a fork. But then there are places. Europe is an interesting, Italy particularly, is interesting in the way that they build equipment and then worry about marketing it later. Okay, so it's like I've made the point for years that the Italians and the Japanese are completely opposite, because the Japanese research the market to death. They figure out exactly what the market wants and what they're willing to pay, and they make a product specific for the market. The Italians just build whatever the hell they want and then worry about selling it later. They build it because it's cool, you know, and they say, oh, we could make a machine that will do this. Well, yeah, you can make a machine that will do that, but now you've got to sell it, you know. So it's funny, you go over there to the Italian, there's this enormous Italian equipment show that happens in Bologna. It's so big, it's actually every other year. They don't have it every year. It alternates with the big one in Germany, which is, those are arguably the two largest agricultural expositions in the world. They're immense. And you see all these little bitty manufacturers making this super specialized equipment. It's like this guy makes equipment for vineyards that are set up on a 4-foot centers. You know, these really compact little, and that's all they make. And it's like this crazy machine with all these, you know, it straddles the row and it like prunes it and sprays it all at the same time. And it's this crazy, I mean, 150,000 euros for one of these things. And I'm like, how many do you sell? One a year. But it's enough, you know. They're making 40,000 euro on it and it's okay. You know, and it's one guy in a welding shop putting this thing together. Apparently the Italian government must do a lot with tax breaks or something to prop up small entrepreneurs, because there's just a ton of small entrepreneurs over there. It's great. And they will make very specific equipment for very specific tasks, and that's all they fool with. I mean, it's like the Berta company who makes the Rotary Plow. They are a company that goes back to about 1960. They specialize in rotary plows, two-stage snow blowers for walk-behind tractors, and lately, since 2009, they build a flail mower as well, which is arguably the best flail mower on the market. That's all they do. It's a pretty narrow focus. They employ 25 people. It's a super tight little business. I mean, you could eat off the floor in that place, and the quality control is amazing. And there's some companies I deal with that are smaller than that. It's like 10 employees at these little places. It's dad, you know, and the boys and a few cousins. And often these companies are named after the founder, you know, like the Berta company is named after Mr. Berta, Aldo Biagioli is after Mr. Biagioli. And now we're getting into the second generations. A lot of these things were started in the 1950s or 60s, and it's gone down to one of the kids now, and they're running the company. So it's kind of neat. But they make all kinds of equipment. You can get a mechanical potato digger for a walk-behind tractor. There's a big vibratory thing that like shakes them up out of the ground. You know, they're $2,000. And let me tell you, they don't work. People see this YouTube video. There's a YouTube video out there that shows this thing in action. And you see that it's working on a very specific raised bed. The raised bed is it's like this. It's a big raised bed that's up out of the ground. And this thing has a big stirrup-shaped blade on the bottom of it, and it's vibrating along, and it's cutting under that bed. What you don't appreciate right away looking at it is that they're not actually going below the surface of the soil. They're just busting up an above ground bed, because that's where the potatoes are. And it's just doing a nice job shaking the potatoes out of there. But I've sold one of these to a guy. He's like, oh, I have to have this thing. It's awesome. So I special ordered him one and sent it to him. And I talked to him 2 years later and I said, what do you think? He says, well, I'll tell you what, if you don't have a bed made just like they have it on the video, you ain't digging potatoes, because a walk-behind tractor doesn't have enough traction to pull those sidebars of that stirrup through the ground if they're submerged in the soil. See? It needs nothing on the sides. It's only going to cut through on the bottom, because you don't have any more traction than that. So it's like, okay, you know, why can't I take that video off YouTube? Because you wouldn't believe how many calls I field a year. I need one of these mechanical potato diggers. It does such a beautiful job. I'm like, well, yeah, if you make raised beds that are just like that, it'll work. Yeah, and have a walk-behind tractor that weighs 500 pounds, because they were using this thing on a massive walk-behind tractor that's almost twice the size of this. So, and they have transplanting equipment. You can get mechanical transplanters for walk-behind tractors, where it'll set the transplants down in the ground.
Does this company have then a mechanical transplanter?
No, it's Chechi and Magley is the company who makes it. I mean, there's a zillion little
It's usually like a two-person operation.
It's a two-person operation.
Oh, it
exactly.
is? Okay.
It is. So you have to have somebody steering the tractor. The other guy's sitting back here on a seat setting plants in, and I'm like, okay, wait. Okay, this thing's $5,000, and you're going to have to employ somebody anyway. And for the scale of agriculture you're doing with a walk-behind tractor, why don't you just go out there and stick the plants in the ground manually? It doesn't make sense to mechanize that level. Again, that's one of those things where we can build this, so they did, you know, but it's not always practical.
Plus you had a magazine loading it.
Right, yeah. And now there are other types of transplanters that are coming around. You know, technologies for paper pot transplanting is something that a lot of growers are getting up on now. And that's something that's probably more conducive to adapting to a walk-behind tractor, because that doesn't need like an auto feeder, or it can be auto fed. So yeah, we're going to be looking at ways to do that. But you know, for a lot of these operations that were done on a small scale, sometimes it's just better to do them by hand and not invest all that money in equipment that has to be readjusted and re-specialized for every bed. So I just wanted to kind of go off on that diatribe a little bit for those people who think we need to mechanize everything. No, not necessarily.
Did you say that Berta is the only company that makes the rotary plow?
Berta has the international patent on the rotary plow right now, yeah. BCS is now marketing a rotary plow under their own brand. They buy it from Berta. It's the same product. They just have a different paint job, and they call it a horrible name. I mean, BCS has just gotten crazy with their names. They decided that they need to name everything. Their new marketing staff is just mad when it comes to this. So they call it the Ground Blaster, which sounds like a grenade. I mean, it just sounds so violent. I just can't stand the name that they've given it. But anyway, so their Flail Mower is called a Blade Runner, and their new clutching system is called the, yeah, that's Harrison Ford, isn't it? And their new clutching system is the Power Safe, and their new sickle bar mower is called the Laser. And everything's got to be cool, and you know, it needs a cool name to market it, because it won't work on its own merits. It's just silly. But yeah.
How would you say a sickle bar attachment rates versus just like buying a lawnmower?
Oh, well, there's no comparison. I mean, the sickle bar is something that's designed to cut hay.
Yeah.
And, you know, it cuts the material off at the base and it falls down whole. So whatever the length of the material is above the blade, that's how big the material is going to be. And frankly, sickle bar, if you use a sickle bar on long grass, you're going to hate it, because when the material is not that much taller than above the blade than it is below, it'll just fall on top of the blade. A lawnmower cutting short grass is fine, because number one, the blades of a lawnmower are angled up so it acts like a fan. It's actually sucking air up, and it's sucking that grass up and shaving it off. And then it's got that centrifugal rotation going at 3,000 RPMs to throw those clippings out away. Well, the sickle bar, it's going like this. You know, it's just a big scissors essentially. So it's moving forward, no centrifugal discharge at all. So if the cut material is only this tall, it falls on top of the blade and just piles up. So after 15 feet, you got this big mound of grass on top, and it just starts pushing over all the grass in front of it. The grass has to be tall enough that when it falls over, because all you're relying on is the forward motion of the blade for that, and that material to clean itself off the top of the bar by falling over. So it has to fall off the back to be carried out of the back and under it. So, but for hay mowing, sickle bars are awesome. Sickle bars are probably they are the most efficient motorized mower you can buy. That is, with a relatively small engine, you can run a relatively large bar. You know, something like this, an 11 horsepower, will run a 59-inch cut sickle bar with the engine at half throttle or less. It just idles, and you can put a lot of grass in the ground fast. But if you're mowing a lawn, it's just going to look a little rough. It's not going to give you that same cut as a lawnmower would. If you don't care what it looks like, it'll still cut it. You know, it's not going to let it go to seed. Some people do use sickle bars to manage cover crops as well, but in that case, you would be cutting it and either leaving it in place as a very coarse mulch, or more often, they're removing the material and putting it in a compost pile and letting it break down that way. Yes?
I was just noticing the time. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the flail mower and the roller.
Versus the crimper roller. Yeah, I was just thinking about that, talking about the cover crops. So the crimper roller. So this is the evolution of cover crop management. Crimper rollers were developed by the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. And we've adapted it to the walk-behind tractor. We worked pretty closely with the Rodale Institute on this, and they were thrilled that we were adapting it to something on a walk-behind tractor scale. So this is a 30-inch, built for kind of the 30-inch bed system. But the idea of a crimper roller, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is that it's a way to have a completely no-till operation and manage cover crop. So the idea is, at the right time, and I can't stress how important timing is with a crimper roller, but at the right stage of seed production of the plant, for example, it would be when the plant that you're growing, the cover crop, is at the flowering stage, and it may have the early stages of setting seeds, but those seeds are not viable yet. They won't grow yet. That's when you crimper roll it. Okay, and what it does, the crimper roller is a heavy drum with these chevron-shaped blades on it, and it's just rolling over the surface of the ground. It's mashing that crop down, and it's crimping the stalk every 6 to 8 inches as it smashes the crop down. And it has to be weighted adequately to do so. This is set up with barbell weights on the insides here. This is how we designed this thing. We recessed the end panels so you could put barbell weights in there to increase the weight of the thing, and you can easily adjust the weight by removing or adding, weights, obviously. But that gives you a good crimp to press that, to get a good crimp on there. And essentially what you're doing, it's kind of nasty when you think about it, because you're really just torturing the crop to death, okay? If the thing weighs too much, it'll actually cut the stalks. So you don't want it too heavy, and you don't want your blades too thin, and you don't want your blades just straight across. If the blades were straight across, it would, as it rolled, it would chunk, chunk, chunk from blade to blade, and that impact would just shear those stems right off. And if you shear it, that's a clean cut. The plant will actually recover from that. What a plant wants to do is put out seed, okay? Just like every other creature on earth. And so if you cut it off clean, the plant can essentially recover from that. It's a clean enough cut that the plant's going to send up some kind of shoot and try to put out more seed. Well, what we're trying to do here is stop the flow of juices through the plant stem and do enough damage to it that it not only, well, it essentially kills the plant. It dehydrates it, but also at that point of seed production, that is when the plant has thrown its energy to the seed head, there's not enough energy in the root to actually sprout back. So timing is critical on this. But what you get when it's done is a mulch that's actually in place. The roots are still in the ground. They're dead. They decompose in the ground, which adds to your fertility. The crop lying on top of the ground adds to fertility because it's releasing the nitrogen that's in it. It's acting as a weed suppressant, the pressed down material on top. It's a moisture preserver because you're covering the ground with mulch. You get beneficial insects will live in it. I mean, any kind of mulching is great for any kind of gardening. I mean, I'm a big believer in mulch gardening. I do a lot of it. I don't use the crimper roller in my own garden yet, just because when you run a business like mine, sometimes timing is something you don't have the luxury of in your garden. I get to it when I can. But for growers who are able to get the scheduling right, the crimper roller is a great tool for managing cover crop in areas, particularly where you're going to grow crops that will deal well with a crimper rolled residue. Okay, and not all crops fit into this. That is, if you're going to grow carrots or you're going to grow lettuce, crimper rolling is probably a really bad idea because those crops are so fine, they're not going to want to deal with that coarse residue laying on top of the ground. But if you're going to plant corn or squash or transplant tomato starts into it or stick potatoes down in the ground or something like this, crimper rolling can work great for you. So it's somewhat crop dependent, but the plant, whatever plant you've got, has to be able to either have enough energy to kind of punch through that mulch residue like potatoes or corn will, or you just transplant down into it manually. But here at Living Web, I know they're doing a lot with the crimper roller. It's a great low impact way of getting a cover crop worked and managed and integrated into the soil. And it's just that slow breakdown. You're not actually mechanically tilling the soil almost at all. Once that crop residue is fully worked, when it fully degrades into the ground, if you want to plant your next cover crop, you could go out with something like a wheel hoe or, using a tiller. Actually, what I do with my own tiller when I'm ready to plant a cover crop, or let me rephrase that, with my Walkman Tractor, when I'm ready to do a cover crop, I put the tiller implement on, but I don't even engage the PTO. I just let the tiller roll across the surface of the ground, and it does enough kind of mixing of the soil, kind of like a disc harrow would. It's just kind of gently busting things up a little bit and exposing a little bit of soil, and it's enough. I can go out there and put my cover crop seed out, drag the tiller across it again, never engage the PTO, just the tines rolling across the top of the ground, kind of integrates enough seed, and that's it. And then I get a nice stand of cover crop. And if I chose, later I could come back with a Crimper Roller. So yeah, it's a no-till, it's true no-till management.
Down in Spring Creek, I saw an area they called no-till, and I was wondering what the heck does that mean?
Right, and of course, as I talked about earlier, the conventional no-till is you poison everything with chemicals, and then you come back in with a seed drill and you drill into that. So that's conventional no-till. Organic no-till is a lot more work in the sense that you've got to integrate it somehow with a cover crop management system, because the cover crop is your no-till tool. The cover crop roots are going to go down there, do the aeration of the soil. They're going to leave, half of the organic material of any given plant is in the soil. It's the roots. Rye, what is it? Rye will grow in a calendar year like a mile of root hair. It's insane. All these little hairs down there in the roots. And when that plant dies, that all turns into fertility because it's organic matter. Plus it's aerated your soil, it's made capillaries for the moisture to move through and everything else. So yeah, no-till it's the ultimate. If you can get a gardening system set up around minimal tillage or no-till, that's like the ultimate, but it takes a while to get there a lot of times because your weed pressures are too high. Cover cropping is a great way to eventually deal with weed pressures, because when you're cover cropping at times when you're not gardening, nothing else can grow. The cover crop just smothers everything else out, and you don't have these weeds going up in the fall and going to seed and causing a weed problem for the following spring. So yeah, there's just a tremendous amount. I can't say enough good about cover crops and green manures. So and between the Flail Mower and the Crimper Roller are the two main tools for managing them, depending on what kind of finish you need afterwards.
The Morrison cedar, is that part of it?
The cedar here that was produced by, and we'll walk over here and look at it. This was produced by John Morrison, who is unfortunately no longer with us, but this was built up in Tennessee. And the idea of this was to have a completely no-till seed drill. So this thing, this little thing kind of rolls the residue out of the way. The coulter cuts a slot in the ground, and then the little seed opener on the back kind of opens up a little bit of a furrow, and then the seeder drops seeds into here. So this is really made to seed grain. It's a grain drill based on a walk-behind tractor. He bought a Grillo tractor from us and modeled this thing on the Grillo. He brought it up to our place and we tested it. Had pretty good results. But on any kind of a large scale, something like this just becomes really impractical because it only does one row at a time. So it's, again, fitting into that narrow window of what's practical and affordable on the scale you're working on is just, something that has to be carefully looked at. The company who's building this after John is gone, there's a company up in Tennessee working on these things. They haven't really started commercially marketing them yet. I need to talk to them and find out what their plans are, because I think there's a place for this. It does fill a niche for people who want to do, some small grain production. They want to do a no-till. I don't think this thing would I don't think it's aggressive enough to actually cut through a rolled down, like crimper rolled residue. That's a big job. When you're cutting through that much residue, the Rodale Institute has built some no-till drills, and they're doing some amazing crop work where they're like rolling down on the front of the tractor. They've got a 10-foot wide crimper roller. We're talking full-size tractors now. So they're pressing down this, sweet clover and oats on the front, and they've got seed drills on the back of the tractor planting corn, same time. And then they get this amazing stand of corn. They've done trials right next to, conventional stuff. And, the moisture retention is so much better. Their soil fertility is so much better. And, but each row unit weighs 500 pounds to slice through that residue that's left by the crimper roller. So, and, you need a full-size tractor to drag something like that through the soil. So, yeah, again, walk-behind tractors are on that small, when you're dealing with a walk-behind tractor, it's a small, lightweight, maneuverable, low-impact tractor. you know, for low compaction. And that often just doesn't go hand in hand with things that require a lot of traction. Just doesn't work. And I mean, when you need a lot of traction, you need a lot of weight. And we can augment the weight somewhat. We can put bigger tires. We have dozer tracks for them now. We have bulldozer tracks you can put on these things, really increase the traction. But even with any of the bells and whistles you want to put on them, there's still limits because it's still only a 300 to 500 pound tractor. There's only so much traction it's going to get. So its strengths lie in other areas. So we can run upstairs and run through the PowerPoint real quick.